list messages, and otherwise I'll try to see if I can fit them within our normal discussion and if we can make that seem natural. If I see something that I think kind of fits, I'll drop it in like real smooth. Otherwise, Gustavo, please keep me honest and don't let me skip
Okay,
anything.
don't worry. I'll be telling you about any questions that pop up.
Okay, I think I'm good. I think I have everything that I need here. I would even dare to say that we can start. Okay, yeah, I feel comfortable. So do all the UN guys, are we good to start? Can we press the go button, the big red button? Is that a yes or no or a maybe?
Yes.
Luis, Sadra, can we just go online or are we online for already? Long pause. Start. We streaming. We're streaming. Can I start them and introduce the panel? And can we just go then? Just to make sure so that we don't have to do this twice. Okay. So let's get this started, everyone. Um, yep, we're live. So welcome to everyone. This is our little panel on IoT. As you can see, we have a very, you know, a very interesting proposition that maybe you weren't seeing around too much. We're gonna talk about IoT on the home environment, and you might be asking yourself, what's so different about that? And whenever I think about the IoT, the first thing that comes to mind are those articles about the future of, automatic cars and about industrial integration and all of that. That's what's in the headlines. But it often slips through the cracks that IoT is very valuable for the end user as well, very valuable and a little bit dangerous. So that's exactly where the title of the panel comes from. Trust, tricks, for threats, and Halloween was just around, so we're still in that mood. We're gonna talk a little bit about the different ways in which this technology can influence the lives of people, and from a few different angles. We have people who are researching this, people who are in the industry, and we'll carry out several different discussions about it. And just to frame things a little bit, I'm Mark Darisgaud. I own a small consultancy in Brazil called Governance Primer, and I work mostly with clients from the global south that want to participate in arenas such as this one and help set standards for technology. And I remember that my first big contact with this subject was in 2016. And some of you might remember, some of you might not. It's the what is known today as the 2016 DIN cyber attack. And that was the first time this subject really popped in my head because it hit very hard. DIN, which operates some of the world's DNS, and that was perpetuated by a botnet called Mirai. And that botnet was really interesting because it made use of basically home appliances like baby monitors and internal cameras and really simple day-to-day things that you wouldn't think as big threat vectors, but since they had, you know, standard passwords, since they had those things that simply were default settings or didn't apply any particular security setting, they could be instrumentalized to attack a DNS provider, which is pretty bad because that took offline a lot of websites such as GitHub, The Guardian, Amazon, Airbnb, just off the internet due to the action of one botnet. And all of it originating from the home environment, right? So it's a lot of printers and baby monitors just attacking this very key resource of the internet. And that was concerning to me. I'm like, okay, this is a subject for the future. And I think that this is exactly what we an example of what we should see on the side of the threat, right? And I would like to talk to my panelists today. It's an honor to have you all here. It's a lot of good people from varied backgrounds. And I'll get started with Savio. Savio Vinicius de Moraes, he is a researcher who specializes in this team. He has been producing some very interesting outputs. He has done a little bit of work with the IETF now. He's involved in the ICANN community, and he has been developing some solutions to maybe work with that kind of protocol. So, Savio, I would really like to know a little bit more about what you think are the origins of these problems and exactly how this goes, if you could.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Mark. So, I think that the root source of this type of IoT security problem starts on the design of the IoT devices. Since in some cases, there are a lot of on-the-shelf IoT devices with this type of with some types of design flaws that can lead us to security problems such as unauthorized access and control of IoT devices, which lead us to this type of uh, botnet infections, as the case of Mirai, and some other situations that starts in a simple point that the sometimes the manufacturer set hard coded on the source code of the IoT devices the full username and passwords, and the end users can change it, or the usage of this the full and easy guessable passwords, weak passwords by the end users, which enables the infection and the unauthorized access and control of these devices. And not only botnets are the problem of this type of access, unauthorized access, sorry, access and control, but also they can lead us to some kinds of physical harm. So if you think in cases like a vulnerable internet connected thermostat being controlled by a hacker, a malicious agent, they can set fire to a house. So, or someone controlling a autonomous device, creating a transit accident. But not only these problems, but going to the privacy issues, there are some cases, there are a lot of cases uh, of IoT devices communicating in clear text. And this enables anyone that can see that network traffic to sniff the traffic and have a kind of live data source of sensible information. Since if you can see that traffic, you can filter that sensible information on the traffic. And in times of data protection and GDPR and the Brazilian LGPD, I think that we should take a look on it. So uh, you may think that this type of design problem design flaw can be solved by updating firmware, but it is also a problem to deal with it because uh, the manufacturer cannot just opt for not updating the firmware, or the end users uh, may not update the firmware when released. And in the case of automatic update points, you have to pay attention on it because a hacker can create a a false firmware and take the full control of the device, exploiting the vulnerability on the firmware update systems. So when we think about this, I think that one of the most important points to prevent this type of design flaw is focusing in having regulation of the certification of the devices, and another point of view to remediate the ongoing threats, maybe focus on uh, uh, standardizing network solutions to prevent this type of attacks. So thank you.
Sorry, muted. That's actually very interesting, Savio. When you mention controlling a thermostat to attack a home or even a corporation, that's very interesting in the worst way possible, right? Because we transcend just this digital layer and we start talking about physical damage, which is again something that I think is being a little bit overlooked. So it's really good to get the perspective, and I think that uh, somebody who could maybe talk about what happens when it's in the person's home or when that threat vector is actually there is Marta. She is the head of AI operations at Zoom Technologies and is a software engineer, technology analyst at the Interregional Bridge Group in Ghana. And Marta, it would be really good to know from you what happens when that is in the person's home. What's going on there? How do we deal with that once it made it out of the factory? What's going on there?
Yeah, so thank you, Mark. Yeah, so just as Savio said, the designing is really sometimes the most of the time the root cause, and building up on that, realize that privacy and security are among the significant challenges of the Internet of Things now. So such things like improper device updates, lack of efficient and security protocols, user unawareness, that people usually do not really know what to do when it comes into monitoring their devices are some of the challenges that the IoT is facing. And because the IoT introduced the hyperconnectivity concept, where different people, different organizations can communicate with each other effortlessly, that poses so much like challenge, that poses so much risk, especially on the grounds when people actually using these devices have to go through the challenge of having to secure passwords, as Savio mentioned. But we realize that many of the devices of the Internet of Things are designed for deployment on a massive scale. And because of this, they comprise of like a set of nearly identical appliances that bear similar characteristics. So these characteristics amplify the magnitude of any vulnerability because anyone can connect at any point in time. And similarly, many institutions have come up with like guides for risk assessments conduction. So even within your homes, even within your individual space, you're able to conduct certain risk assessments to be sure of what you're exposing your information or what you're exposing your privacy to. So for instance, when it comes to let's say authentication, IoT faces various vulnerabilities, and that remains one of the most significant issues in the provision of security in many applications. So the authentication usually that we see is limited to how it protects basically just one threat, which is the denial of service attacks or the replay attacks. So information security is one of the most significant or vulnerable areas in authentication of IoT devices. And because now it's been embraced in almost every phase of life. For instance, in every home, people try as much as possible to keep up with IoT devices because that is the trend. So realize that these risks keep increasing, and if nothing is done, people would be subject their privacy to the general public, because day in, day out, as the manufacturers are also finding ways to protect the system. Hackers are also always trying to find ways of bypassing them to be able to get access to information. So if we take, for instance, the contactless credit cards, which we use, realize that these cards are capable of allowing card numbers and names once just the maybe details of the cards are entered in. So in this case, no proper authentication is done, and then it makes it possible for hackers to be able to purchase goods by banks using the cardholder's identity without necessarily authenticating if that is the real user, because they just have access to part of the information in there. So yeah, these are some of the breaches and then the design causes, which we see mostly in the use of these IoT devices, especially in homes and in institutions where they're used.
That's really interesting, Marta. When you say something like lack of efficiency in protocols and so on, it just leaves me a little worried about how these protocols are, what's the status. I think you're not very happy about them. Is that it's you're not exactly very confident in them? Is that so?
Yes, so currently what we see is, even though there are protocols that guide the use of the IoT devices in terms of guiding people going through the right procedures and securing their data, we usually see that people are unaware of these protocols, especially the people who are supposed to make sure their passwords are not exposed. People are supposed to make sure their systems are secured, although they've purchased these devices outside the manufacturing scope within the homes. There's unawareness, and it creates a huge problem, which leads to these malicious attacks and stuff like that.
I would say that sounds a little concerning, and I think that we might have somebody who might have something else to say about that, because we are discussing here the manufacturing, what are the problems once it's actually in the home. And I think our panelist Edgar Ramos, who is a senior researcher of IoT and cyber physical systems at Ericsson in Finland, and also works in AI distribution and enablers for devices in IoT, he can say a little bit more about what's going on in terms of those protocols and how exactly we can tie together what Savio is saying, what Marta is saying, and Edgar, how can we move this forward? What is going on there, and what do you suggest us?
Well, first of all, there is two sides of the same coin. So, in one hand, what, for example, Marta was talking about, that they are this kind of credentials and different data that is coming from the devices, which is kind of accessible, and it could be attacked. Has in one hand, that has been trying to be solved by centralization of data. And this means that many device manufacturers are there having their own cloud systems, or they are having or hiring cloud systems from public cloud, where they actually start to collect a lot of this data, and then the credentials and everything is kind of in the same place, and then they have a very big infrastructure specialized in protecting certain type of assets, like, for example, credentials. But in the other hand, the other side of the coin is that this model is scalable up to a certain point. So the more devices are start to exist, so the more difficult it will become to be able to centralize everything. You have this data. So by now there is zettabytes of data produced by all the IoT devices. And then the question is, who is consuming that? So there is also the problem with privacy. So if all my data is being collected in certain, who knows, whatever country where these data centers are, which are having the cloud systems, so what regulatory framework is being applied to my data? Is it so that anyone in the, from other country which has an order from the law to access my data can do it? Or is it so that I have some protections even if I, for being a citizen of certain country, but not if I'm not, and so on. And then there is another perspective to that, and it's the end user agreement. So if I'm a user and I want to agree with another company, well, this is the data you can use, and this other data, there is no way you can take it and do anything with it. What happens? So today, what happens normally is that you cannot use the product. So basically, you buy a product, it says like, please, do you accept everything? Yes or no? And then if you say no, okay, sorry, then you cannot use the product. And that is the situation today. And then finally, who owns that data? So if my device is producing data, I bought it. It's my car. I am driving it. Why that data should be shared to somebody else if I don't allow it, or if, and then again, if I have to already sign out that in order to use my car, I have to be okay with that. So is all this, intertwined policies and agreements something that I am as a consumer will be fine with? Maybe not. And then the level of or granularity of control that we have of these kind of things in central level is very little. Then when I was talking about the other side of the coin is like, can we actually bring down and try to recover? Because if I have my own refrigerator, if I have my own car, if I have my own thermostat, can I just set up for that particular device certain type of policies of what type of data it's produced and where there it goes? So basically, what we are trying to do now, I mean, one of the main reasons for centralization has been AI and try to bring intelligence to this device that can be, crunching big data numbers and then bring you back some value. But then some of these could be done in the device themselves or even in edge systems, which could be in our own houses. For example, we could have our own, I don't know, small server that can be implemented in a router, which is the one that we have some certain control over it. And it could be our kind of gateway manager for policies of what things can be brought outside, what things can I control and keep in my ecosystem, my own system in my house, and then also what things I want to have direct control. And maybe some of them I can even provide some certain guidance and then manage it in some way. So all this brings a lot of issues, which is related to fragmentation. So how you could actually make possible that if all the devices are different, if all the platforms are different, should we just come out with certain way to being able to implement this kind of distributed system, taking in account the heterogeneity of hardwares and platforms? Another problem is the monetization and business model, but nothing is going to happen if somebody doesn't make money out of it. Unfortunately, that's the reality. And that is where the industry is playing a role. So we are trying to look at solutions that brings up market incentives so that we can actually be part of this solving this problem, but at the same time make and that we are doing a service to society. We are also, let's say, having a profit out of it. And the profit is so that we can continue with our R&D, so that we can produce better solutions, And then also everyone gets benefit. I mean, the end user, the end customer will be happy with those solutions. So I think that pretty much brings another perspective of the problem, not only about just the problem of security, but also what happened with that data and how it is processed.
Thank you, Edgar. I think that sheds a lot of lights on what we're trying to discuss, especially when you talk about the dreaded terms of service, right? What exactly are we agreeing to when we click that big button? And I see a lot of activity on the chats. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our two very valued supporters. We have J1 Son from the AP region. She was my next generation icon a few years ago, but now she's a star in her own right, much bigger than me. Thank you for being here, J1. We also have Luis Gustavo from Brazil helping us here, keep us honest and keep us on time. Thank you so much for being here. I would like to ask from you guys if there's any specific question right now that we should be tackling, that you gather from the chat, or should we move on to a round two, or should we ask our audience to maybe post it on the QA pod? What do you guys think? Either J1 or Gustavo?
I think we can just go to round two and then do the Q&A like all together, maybe.
Okay. Make sure to maybe have a little list of some interventions, everyone, so that we can keep track of what's going on. And I would ask the audience if you have any pointed questions for our discussion. Please leave it on the Q&A pod. I think we are good on time, and we'll be more than able to discuss them. So, to the second round, I would bring something a little more open-ended. I would like to know, how do we bring all of this together? So we made these introductions. I think we know what problem we're trying to tackle here, and I would like to ask Savio to bring this perspective from something that I know he's involved with. He's has been involved with the ITF. He has been studying this. So, Savio, how do we tackle this from that particular angle? You are muted, Savio. Can you?
Sorry, my internet has fallen.
Please.
So thank you again, Mark. So I'm following some IETF discussions on reinforcing IoT security in the network level. So I can say that they are doing a huge, playing a role, sorry, a huge role in the reinforcement of IoT security in the network level, mainly under operational area working group and think-to-think research group. And I would like to share here one of the most important recent standards that was released by IETF related to IoT security. That is the RFC number 8520. That is the manufacturer usage description, or just MUD. And MUD is important for security because it enables the device to enables the reducing of the capability of a IoT device being attacked or being used as attack vector, because it defines means to the manufacturer of the device inform to the network manager what are the expected network communication and traffic of a IoT devices. So under MUD, around MUD, sorry, it's being discussed the building of a new working group in IETF to work in other more standards for IoT security, improving standards like SUD and other protocols and other standards. And also, for example, in ICANN, I had contact with some TLD operators, just like the .nl and .ca from Netherlands and Canada, and they are working on for example, uh, home gateways firmwares which implement MUD because MUD supports the mitigates the working of botnets like Mirai, which are affecting the DNS systems stability. So this is one point, and academia is also working on it. So I can cite here some great works from University of Twente and University of Sydney, Twente in Netherlands and Sydney in Australia. And I am as master's candidate. I'm also working on it. I'm developing a security complement or extension, as you prefer to ask, to say, that uh, gives a second relying point in the point of view of security, in which you are not only relying into the manufacturer description of usage of the device, but a security operations center or security specialist can analyze, for example, MUD files and find possible backdoors implemented by the manufacturer, or if a new vulnerability is discovered, there is a network communication to exploit this vulnerability. And before to the manufacturer make a firmware update, we can the security team can block this trafficking into domestic networks using description of this traffic that are related to the malicious activities. And then I hope that next year I'm going to submit it as a internet trafficking IETF. This extension it's called INXU, INXU, that is named Inter-Network Exposure Analyzer Utility, and yeah, that's it.
That actually sounds pretty good. Let me acknowledge that as someone who has been, a part of the youth movement and have been one in the past and now have comfortably moved into post youth. It's really good to see, young people involved in this arena. It's something that we are trying to work on. I think how to bring in new talents, and it's definitely good to know that you're managing to get this work started, Savio. Like on a personal note, it makes me very happy to see that. It's something that I think is very needed, and I think this ties perfectly with what Marta was discussing with us during the preparation for this panel, which is exactly what goes on in terms of okay, so some things have been deployed, some things have not. There are many devices out there. There's devices that are yet to be produced, and there's all the standards. And how do we tie all this together, Marta? What are good practices for us to just make sure that this is not going, very bad very fast?
Yeah, so thank you. And you realize that even though the manufacturer's usage description can be implemented well, and then probably they are fully compliant, there exist certain flaws or behaviors that can only be defined by, let's say, your local policy. So this brings us to why or what are some of the things we can do to make sure we are adhering to the best practices that conforms with all privacy laws, and then not breaching any per se. So first off, I'd want to say things taking authentication seriously is something that might have been overlooked and it's a call. So we need to rely on like up-to-date encryption protocols that would help us encrypt end to end, so that even if hackers manage to get access to your network, or they penetrate into your network, they are not able to get information out of that. So there is a saying which says crypto is only as strong as how it's implemented. And if it's poorly implemented as well, with other protocols that are known vulnerable, they will be more vulnerable in the future. Yes, so in as much as we take authentication seriously, we make sure we rely on updated encryption protocols. It also comes down to how strong these protocols are made. Also, I would like to mention that aside taking authentication or seriously, we need to also make sure we change default passwords and credentials. Many a times we purchase these IoT devices, bring them home, and then we still go with default passwords, which are easily guessed by hackers or any other person. So this advice may seem like common sense, but yeah, it's real. People out there just go ahead and use supply default passwords. So we need to usually configure and make sure we're changing our passwords, because this is something that in the industry we see a lot. And then also we also need to look at the data which we are providing to this or putting into the IoT devices, so we understand how the IoT devices interacts with the data provided, and then also be able to utilize that to like identify anomalous activities which may happen or might occur along the way. In addition to that, also we can say we need to track and manage devices well. So this is a very good point to start with, because when we understand what exactly a device is connected to and then what they do, we are able to tell and then be able to keep up with all of them, even manually. So we're able to track and make sure that these devices are not being intruded or being prone to attacks or any of these. Finally, I would also want to say we need to consider using a risk-driven strategy. So we have these IoT devices that comes, and then we require some cybersecurity. I would recommend that we use this risk-driven strategy to sort of place priority on certain critical assets in the IoT infrastructure. And then when we look at these given assets and then we value them, we are able to prioritize them and secure them accordingly, and then we are able to stay safe also. Yeah.
Thank you, Marta. You said a magic phrase, which is critical assets on IoT structure. When I hear that, I'm immediately brought back to my little world of internet governance and ICANN, and what is a critical resource, what is a critical asset. And the, moving forward, I think we'll need to think even more about how the devices are working, not only how the network is working. So we're adding a little extra complexity to it's just something that's already complex. We already have a lot of problem with routers and default passwords and that kind of exploitation. And it looks like it's not getting any easier, which is why I would like to call on Edgar to talk a little bit more about what can be accomplished in the other groups and what can different postures can be taken around the industry for us to try to see some light at the end of the tunnel. Edgar, if you could.
Yeah, sure. And I think I would like to also bring even additional aspects that are beyond the networking, because I mean, connecting with what Marta has been saying, additionally to encryption, for example. So we think that if we encrypt everything end to end, that's the end of our problems, and then everything will be secure, and then we have two places. But then where is the trust? So this end-to-end connection, it meant that you have a trust relationship between these two entities. How do you work in a world where trust cannot be ensured, in the sense that if I'm a car and I'm driving and then I go to the next traffic light, how do I trust that traffic light? I have never seen it before. I haven't heard about that traffic light ever previously. So How do I start to communicate with that? So then there's these mechanisms of trust that we are used today are starting to be evolving to become something more ad hoc, something that you actually have to handle with policies instead of handling with rules, which the rules is like if I find traffic traffic light 1.3.4, then I do B. And if it's not that, then I don't do anything because I don't trust it. You cannot apply that kind of models anymore. Another problem that we are having is problems of discovery. How do I know that that traffic light exists? Where do I start to look for it? How I can find what it does? And then when I finally want to know what it does, how I know what is that? How I know that the traffic light actually is putting me these colors to know that I have to go front, or is maybe just seconds and it's telling me how many seconds the traffic light will still be lasting, or if it's having a sound, or whatever is the service this traffic light is given. So I need semantic models on top of what this it is being given. And then I have to understand the semantic in the same way how the traffic light understands it. So if the traffic light thinks that red is a color and it is defined with certain pattern, I have to understand red as the same that the traffic light. All this means that we need standards. We need interoperability. I mean, the same for when we are distributing and we are talking about decentralization. So we might need federation. We might need ways to connect systems that otherwise are not directly connected. And then they need to have a connectivity not only from the physical layer perspective, but also in the higher layers. So how you actually access those services. Is it a REST? Is it an API? Is it using calls? Whatever type of things that we are given. And then when you are talking about criticality, there is an issue about latency, capacity. So do I actually have what I need? So do I want that my car goes and send a packet to the network to ask, do I need to brake in this moment because there is something detected by my LiDAR in front of my self-driven car, or I want that my car is the one who takes that decision. I brake now, and I don't wait for the whole latency to send a packet to the network so that it's processed, so that it comes back and say, yes, please, brake as soon as possible. So we have these kind of issues that has to be solved, and it requires a joint effort because it's not only the device manufacturer, it's not only the network provider, it's not only the application developer, it's everyone who had to kind of be in the chain. Therefore, we need beyond the standards that we have in ITF, for example, in IEEE. So we need consortia that are based on in specific groups of use cases. For example, the automotive is one good example, but there are quite many other examples. For example, the critical industrial processes with robots. Then we have also maybe the consumer devices will have also their own consortia. But then not only that, but I think we need also to go a little bit more horizontal and identify these kind of specific things which are affecting to everyone, and see how we can give generic tools that everyone can reuse so that we have a better way to solve this kind of more particular problems, which are what we call verticals.
Thank you so much, Edgar. That I think what you did was frame this on a broader uh, manner. So, how do we look at this from the way the network interacts with the devices, and who takes control, who takes the decisions? And I think this kind of takes us in a seamless way to some of the things that have been raised in the chat by our esteemed attendees. In particular, I would like to bring a question brought here by Professor Wolfgang Kleinwachter that talks exactly about data ownership. So he asked exactly, does the unsolved problem of data ownership will further cascade problems in our daily life? Any alternative? And this is something that I think we discussed a lot in our preparation, right? Exactly where is the data, who owns the data, who is able to control it. And I do think the panel has something to say about that. I know for a fact that you guys do. So I would like you to make maybe brief 1-2 minutes interventions on this subject, because I know we have something to say about it.
Yeah, I can say one thing about data ownership. The first thing is that data is a bit interesting because you think that data will be like money. You can transfer it from one place to another. But the thing is that you can copy and you keep it. And then money, you don't copy. I mean, you give it and you lost it, that's it. But data is different. And that means that we need mechanism that could, in a way, could mimic what we do with money. So that if you give the data to somebody and that person can use it or that institution can use it, cannot have the chance to copy by itself. So there have been some research done based on ledgering technologies to do this and try to address specifically that problem. How can we do that the data is not replicable if it's not given a permission to do so? And I think that is very interesting research. I think it's going in a direction that can bring us there, where we can actually pinpoint who is actually the owner of certain data. Then the other part of the problem is like how this data is generated, and then in which level of this generation the ownership is established. But then maybe that's another thing that has to be considered, and it depends on policies, regulations, and also maybe your own preference.
I know Marta might have something to say about that. Do you want to intervene a little bit, Marta?
Yeah, I do. So just to add on to what has been said so far, I think when it comes to data ownership, the subject or the owner of the data, I mean, whoever is providing in that data should have an opportunity to either request or refuse how data is transferred outright to any collection without interruption. Because as it stands now, these, let's say, manufacturers or companies have access to the data no matter what. And even if they are not going to have access to the data, some way, somehow, data is stored either locally or even on cloud. So there should be some form of strict policy or laws binding that, so that people have the right to either refuse the transfer of the data, and then we can say indirectly individuals are also having ownership of data other than third parties having ownership of their data.
I think that this ties very well with another question that we had by Mr. Wout. Sorry, not very good with that particular pronunciation, but he asked, should there be a rule on consumer control on connection or no connection to phones data home? And I think that that ties directly with that, right? So exactly how do we work with the fact that there will be data flowing between the device and the manufacturer. And before I move on to a next question that I also think is very interesting, I would just like to ask Savio, do you have anything in particular to add to this one, or should we move to the next question? Perfect. So for Mr. Woods as well, do you have any thoughts on legacy IoT that may be around for years after the last update has been provided? And thank you for clarifying. So, Woods, thank you. So, on the matter of legacy IoT, it's something that I have researched a little bit, and I know for a fact that from the time that the device is planned to when its components are developed to when it's actually deployed, there's a bit of a huge life cycle. And then after that, there's the whole life cycle that goes on in the person's home. And then there's no retirement policy either. You can so how do we work with this, everyone? How exactly do we deal with legacy IoT, and we make sure that whatever comes forward, right? Whatever we produce that will become legacy 3 years from now. What do we do with that? And I see Edgar unmuted because he's just fired up to answer this one. So I give it to you, Edgar.
Yeah, the thing is that this is one of my let's say, passionate things in the sense that um, I believe in a sustainable world. So I believe that we should be in a planet where the things shouldn't just be trash because they cannot be updated. And I think there is a crash here of between these, like, let's try to make the things sustainable, the most long living possible, and then the other thing, like, well, let's bring new products, let's bring the new features as a new product, so you have to buy it again, the same thing you had but a little bit better. And then at the same time, um, we don't care anymore about this old thing, so we force you to go to the upgrade. And I live, I mean, I work in the industry, so I know how this thinking goes. But I think that there should be this more circular economy type of thinking being brought to the industry, and it is being brought to the industry. I think it's starting to bloom there, where we are now starting to generate products which are more generic in the sense that they are more like platforms that can enable features. And these features, maybe they are more software features, and they use artificial intelligence features, or they use support from other parts, like, for example, new sensors or new type of data inputs, which might be services given by websites or whatever, that maybe the previous generation didn't have an access. And then the only thing you need to do is a software upgrade, and then getting new things in that platform. A little bit, we can think about, I like Android a lot because it has brought a bit of that, not fully, but still we have to buy a new phone if you want to have the latest Android, let's say, device. But you can actually have quite many updates and bring quite a lot of new value to your device. And then I think, imagine that in your refrigerator, imagine that um, in your car, until then the end of life of that device gets, because, okay, you cannot have enough processing because the lithium in the battery cannot be anymore be processed. And I mean, there could be certain reasons for that, but maybe then you only need to change certain parts, and then the device could continue going on. So I believe that should be the future. That is how it should go. But I mean, everything is a market economy nowadays, so we have to find those incentives to make it happen.
I find that rather insightful. I think that we really need to balance out things here, right? It's not just being activistic and saying, okay, let's do this. It's how do we balance the industry, and how do we make sure, okay, let's make money, and at the same time, let's make this responsible. I think that there's a very tricky balance there. Savio, I wonder if you have something to add on top of that, since you're kind of the
Yeah.
academic slash industry slash, you're there, you're in the middle. So how does that go?
Another point of view about these legacy systems, it's not quite a so different problem, such as in computers, for example. So we still have cases, for example, of computers and companies and schools and end users using Windows XP that was that has no security update so long time ago, and still Windows 7 that it was discontinued not that much years ago, but we still have end users and so using it. So it's still a problem that we will have to deal, and more dramatically in IoT, because of the nature of cyber physical systems of IoT. And when I think in countries, in development countries, uh, what I think that will happen in this type of situation is that okay, I have a smart bulb and I want to build to buy a new smart bulb, so I will sell my used smart bulb and buy another, and this life cycle will keep going and going and going. But in a different point of view, the ongoing on-the-shelf IoT, uh, at least for domestic environment, IoT systems are based on a vendor's website in which you have to communicate to vendor's website to use your IoT systems. So this can force us to change again. So it's not a big difference, but we have some different points to take into consideration in this type of thing. But maybe we will have we will have maybe not that much problems because of this type of communication with the device that is intermediated by the vendor.
I find that fascinating that we are moving into a point where we can actually start to have these conversations, and hopefully we will. I wonder if Marta has anything to say because I know that is something that's also very much in your heart.
Yeah, so I think to add to what has been said so far, an alternate way would just be to use gateways, in which case you provide the value by attaching the existing devices that you have and their sensors in order to probably get or create all the data and then be able to like use them. So this creates opportunity to have an optimized device, and then it prevents sometimes failure in most cases. So you're able to create much more services at the end of the day. And as Edgar said, so this would have to come with also intelligence. So including intelligence in that such that this is done seamlessly to avoid any mishaps in the system.
That sounds perfect. I think a lot has been discussed here and exposed here. So, for the benefit of the audience, in case anybody wants, I'll be posting my email on the chat. In case anybody wants to connect with any of the panelists to ask further questions or learn more about some of the technologies that we have discussed here, please reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to connect you and bring this information to you. As I think we're discussing some very valuable points here, and time flies. We have 3 minutes to go, and I would first like to thank my panel. You have been wonderful. I think that this discussion has been well structured. I think we brought some very interesting points. It's so good to have everyone talking about such interesting things. And I would leave a space for a small 30-second consideration, 1 minute tops consideration that you might have for us to close out this session. You can also do some spam and advertise any project you have. So I'll pull the trigger right now by going straight to Savio. Savio, your turn.
Thank you. So the first thing that I would like to thank you, Walt, for the indication of the DC ISSS. I will follow it. And uh, an interesting point that we have to think about it is that IoT security is not a future problem; it's a ongoing problem, or not just a problem, but a solution. So we have things to in a medium long term, but ongoing problem. So thank you.
I would like to call from the floor or Rapporteur J1. Do you have any considerations since you've been watching so intently our discussion?
Uh, Thank you so much for the panels. I've learned a lot today since I'm like from very, very non-technical community. So, but like yesterday, I was talking about the sustainable computing and how IoT can help environment. And now we are talking about the threats. So that made me kind of like think of everything. But like for me, I thought like end users and not many civil society even know about those terms. So I really hope this session might have like brought more awareness toward the issues. But like just a quick thought, like just in practical term, like when you buy a cigarette, like it says a warning about like you might die or something. But for the IoT devices, no one really says like when you buy it, you don't really know like what's on it, right? So, but I think like the company wouldn't really write about it, like since they have to sell it. So I thought always about maybe there should be a policy or law about like implementing like warning, like maybe you got like cyber attack or something, maybe it should be there. So I think many people are watching our session today, so some of the lawyers, politicians, please do something about it. And yeah, thank you for the session.
Thank you, J1, for giving us this bonus civil society perspective. It's actually very good. Thank you so much. Marta, I wonder if you have any final consideration to make, or if you're available. It looks like you have a little icon. I'll give it to Edgar, and you can come right back, Marta. Edgar, any final consideration?
Yeah, I think the Internet of Things is quite interesting phenomena that has happened to the world, and it will continue evolving. And I think everyone should get benefit out of it, not only those who have the money to buy the devices, but also I think all the society, because it's more than just consumer. It's also about infrastructure. It's also about manufacturing, and it's even going to be in our bodies at some point. We will have nanorobots swimming in our blood streams at some point. We want that this is secure, that is safe. We want it to be done in the way that it is supporting our humanity and our society. And we as a company in Ericsson, we are very committed to that. That's part of the journey we have been taking with 5G, and we will continue developing solutions that are oriented in that direction for 6G. Myself, I am leading projects in artificial intelligence, which are looking also at responsibility of the explainability of algorithms and AI who should do good, and let's say like that, and then should help the society. And then how to bring that accessible to everyone and in everything. So we are talking about equality here. So that's pretty much my advertising for today. But thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be in this panel.
Thank you. The pleasure was definitely yours. I'll try Marta one more time. I don't know if she's still with us or if her connection went dead for a little
Yeah,
bit. Thank you, Marta. So good
I'm
to
here.
hear from you.
Sure. Yeah, so I think personally it's been exciting joining the panel because I had perspectives of IoT and the threats and tricks that comes with it. But I think the panel has been great. I've learned a lot from Ega and Savio as well. And I know as time goes on would collaborate more because IoT is not going to end. It's not something that we're going to say because there are certain loopholes or there are certain threats associated with it, we are going to stop using it. So I believe as time goes on, we would reason into more better ways of protecting ourselves against threats from hackers and all. And I'd like to say thank you also for joining this session. I think it was great. Thanks for inviting me as well.
Thank you, panelists. Thank to your support staff. Thank you for everyone from the IGF support team. You've been invaluable to us. Thank you for your audience. And I hope that we can bring more of this. I definitely think there's room for a repeat of this panel next year. We should really look forward to doing this again. It's been great. It's been a pleasure being your moderator. And I wish everyone, please stay safe out there. Please, let's continue having these discussions and bringing our voices to different panels. I think that, this is how we evolve the youth ecosystem, by just pushing forward with meaningful topics and doing good stuff. Thank you, everyone. And I now declare the session closed. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you all for joining the IGF. Bye bye.